During the summer of 2020, the United States Bowling Congress Equipment Specifications and Certifications team began a comprehensive research study on string pin setters, specifically looking at the scoring and pinfall variables between non-approved string pin setters and USBC certified freefall pin setters. USBC researchers designed a series of tests to collect extensive data from various models of string pin setters. The research project was planned to take more than a year, with complete results published in 2022. As with all USBC research, the organization intends to publish the data and share the analysis for the benefit of bowling and for USBC members. While a final report is not due until 2022, USBC is sharing key preliminary findings so stakeholders can review relevant data as it becomes available. This most recent phase of tests included more than 86,000 shots made on free-fall machines and string pin setters combined. The areas that were focused upon for the research included BOWLSCORE pinfall data, human league bowling tests, E.A.R.L simulations, pin specifications, and string length and material analysis.
With regards to this test, BOWLSCORE we use to approve pinfall. So if there's a new pin, it's got to go through BOWLSCORE. It's got to go through a field test. So it's just a natural place to start with string pins. Well, let's get them to see if they pass BOWLSCORE, because that would be a good, quick test we can do to say, is it the same as freefall or not, and how is it different?
After conducting the BOWLSCORE tests, which included over 60,000 shots, the data shows that strike percentages are lower in all entry angles, and smaller entry angles are more strongly affected than larger entry angles. Overall, strike percentages were down 10.7% on string machines across all entry angles combined.
So what we noticed on the high end of the pocket is that these machines are leaving 4 pins and 4-7 combinations a little bit more often than freefall. And on the light end of the pocket, what we're noticing is light mixing strikes are greatly reduced.
Additionally, counts of 8, 7, or less are up throughout all angles of entry as the offset position increases beyond 4 inches.
Along a similar line, so when we don't get those strikes on the light hit, we're seeing more 8s and 7 or less counts. We've seen 4, 5, 7s a lot and 2, 4, 5s a lot. It's typically some part of a bucket or some part of a really light hit split that maybe has an extra pin standing than it normally would.
You got to go through the process because, again, the goal is for the equipment not to be the dominant factor in scoring. We want the bowler's ability, their ability to throw a ball, hit their target. That should dominate bowling, not the equipment.
The league simulation tests yielded the following findings, with averages shown to be statistically and significantly different depending on the string length of each machine being tested. Machines utilizing short and medium length strings yielded the highest averages, with machines with longer strings yielding the lowest. Freefall pin setters were also included in order to establish a control set, which ended up coming in almost directly in the middle of the average data sets. Machines utilizing short and medium to long strings yielded averages that were the closest to those on the freefall pin setters. As you might expect, based on the averages, strike percentages ranked similarly along the same lines. The machines where averages were higher yielded a lower percentage of corner pins, and vice versa.
I think the interesting part of the averages was that one string pin setter scored quite a bit more than freefall, and another one tended quite a bit lower than freefall. So it's not like strings are naturally going to increase everybody's average. It's very interesting to see that it's not just all of them make it easier. Some of them actually made it a little bit harder.
String assistance on pinfall was also tracked in these tests, and the machines where averages were higher had a higher percentage of string-assisted strikes than machines where averages were lower. Another aspect impacting scoring was the percentage of string-assisted spare conversions on each machine type. The machines yielding higher scores had a higher percentage of string-assisted spare conversions.
With string pin machines, you get a new ally in knocking down pins. So now in the case where you wrap something around the 10, be it the head pin or the 6 pin, if something's going around the outside of it, and then that string becomes tight somewhere in the pit, well, that string is trying to make a straight line from the head pin spot to wherever the head pin ended up. So if anything's getting in the way of that string getting tight and making a straight line, it's going to have a tendency to pull it over.
After the league bowling study identified areas of focus, E.A.R.L testing honed in on attempting to establish causes for differences in scoring.
E.A.R.L testing just evolved as bowlers were bowling, and we saw the pins flying around differently than you saw normally. Oh, let's do something with E.A.R.L. So let's shoot at these splits. That definitely came from seeing what happened with the bowlers.
String length, kickback width, and the placement of short strings on the pocket or non-pocket side of the rack were all tested, with data showing that each setup has a statistically significant impact on strike percentages.
All these machines had to come up with solutions to certain problems, and some of them shorten strings. When you do that, and the 6 pin has a short string on one lane and a longer string on the other, your wrapped 10 hit almost always carries on the left lane but doesn't carry on the right lane.
Additionally, some unusual anomalies regarding spare conversions were discovered during the league bowling simulation on the machines with shorter string lengths. So further testing was conducted using E.A.R.L to gather more data on those.
Throughout the course of the testing, we've encountered things like splits being converted a lot more simply. And what's even more than that is you can attack a split from a new perspective and sometimes get a conversion in a really bizarre way. So as an example, we worked on converting 2 8/10s, right? But depending on the length of the string the 10 pin has, you can actually deflect it out of the back of the pit and have it swing around on a string similar to a tether ball and take out the 8 and the 2 from behind. So it's a completely different concept in shooting the 2 8/10 than we've seen before, and it only works when the strings are a certain length. Once they get long enough, in other machines it doesn't happen, but if you have too short of a string that it gets tight after it's deflected off of a boundary, you can get the swinging motion that really makes it a lot easier to convert stuff that should be very hard.
Testing showed that using shorter strings on the pins on the right side of the rack, the 2 8/10 could be converted up to 60% of the time, the 4-6 30% of the time, and the 7-10 22% of the time.
Bowling pins have specifications on them already. It's a whole process to go get a bowling pin approved. But all these machines we were testing basically took a pre-existing approved pin and drilled holes in the top of them to attach the string somehow, whether it be with some kind of plastic clip or just straight through with a knot. All of the attachment methods were a little different, and all the sizes of the holes being drilled into the pins were different. So we took these pins back to our lab where we approve pins, where we measure them for all our specifications, and we say, do they still pass or not? Did the hole make them fail? And for the most part, it barely changed the weight of the pin. It takes out a very, very small fraction of weight. It barely lowered the CGs of pins. We're talking like a 32nd of an inch. So it's a very, very small difference in the CG height. And both of those items remained in spec for all the pins we tested. But the RG of the pin, or how hard it is to rotate the pin, that dropped from near the low end of the spec to just below it. It's still a small change, but they were borderline to begin with, so it's moving some percentage of pins outside of specification in RG. So we're investigating that further, but it's important to us for these pins to continue to pass spec, because the specs are there for a reason, to standardize the game and have the pin action be as similar as possible.
As mentioned previously, it was determined in prior tests that string length had a significant impact on scoring.
Part of this project is to fully understand all the new elements that the strings bring into it. So part of our string length analysis was to say, we have all these machines with different string lengths and the materials look a little bit different. So we really want to dig into that and fully understand it. In the grand scheme of things, on the material side of things, they actually were all pretty similar. But we did notice that they seem more rigid when they first start out, and as they go through use, they become a little bit more pliable. So there is a certain break-in period where these strings become more pliable. So that really just led us to find that there is some break-in period that we need to fully understand, but we think it's a pretty quick break-in period. We don't think it's a long-term.
Based on the collective data from the tests to date, a certification for string pin setters to be used alongside freefall machines for standard American 10-pins bowling would not be reasonable at this current time.
Yeah, everybody wants to know the end date. And the reality with research just takes time. I have a saying, I can schedule tests, not results. In other words, we do a test. Can we come up with a spec now? Does everything point to one thing to change? And normally it doesn't. So you do another one, and you do another one. Now we have to figure out what those specs are, you know? Like we mentioned string length. We know string length affects it, so what's the right number that everyone should hit? And that's the kind of testing. We test the equipment, we determine the properties we need to set specs on, we just don't know the final numbers. And that's what we're doing now, is additional testing to come up with when do the spare shoots, the splits that we saw being converted, when do they get closer to free fall? What do we have to do to the machine to get that to happen? And we're zoning in on it.